Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. You ever hear me okay? No. Speak up. No.
Move the mic in.
No.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, tonight's February the 2nd, 6 o'clock, and I'd like to call tonight's meeting to order of your city council. And we're going to start off with a moment of silence and a pledge of allegiance led by Mrs. Tillett. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Johnson, have a roll call, please.
Mayor Jerome,
Here.
Ms. Tillett,
here.
Mr. Rolfson,
Here.
Ms. Rich,
Here.
Mr. Slavy,
Here.
Mr. Crail,
Here.
Mr. Roulette.
Here. Okay, before we start with the public comments, I'd like the council people to put away your cell phones or put them on, turn them off. And also for the audience also, please turn your cell phones off and put them on vibrate wherever you need to do. Appreciate that. We're going to start with some public comments. Again, you're going to be limited 3 minutes, and you can talk on subjects that are not on the city's, on our agenda calendar for tonight. I have Dr. Payetz and to speak.
Oh, wow, I can barely reach this thing. Okay. In one of the earlier council meetings, a question arose about why a decision had been made by an earlier council. And at that time, someone was able to look up the minutes of the meeting because they were in depth, discover the reasoning behind it, and go along with it. At that same meeting, later on, the issue of should they change to the action minutes form came up, and the decision was made to change to action minutes. That being said, action minutes don't give you any explanation of why any decision was made. They simply report the decision. I think you guys shot yourself in the foot. I think you needed to know why an earlier group made a decision so that you will be informed and in a position to make a wise decision. The council has never explained, issue 2, why Mr. Costeau got into difficulties with the council. I heard a lot of reasoning about what happened, about resignation memos, but I never heard anybody give us any information of what the problem originally was. And I would really like to know that. The next issue that I'm concerned about, I really was eager for Mr. Costeau to take this position. He was definitely the person that that board considered number one. And yet, once he arrived, something went wrong, and appears that a resignation letter was tendered. If in fact a letter of resignation was
Dr.
tendered.
Payet, I'm going to interrupt you. That's an item that's going to be on the agenda tonight. If you have another item, and with your limited time left,
Okay.
please address it. Thank you.
I'm concerned that this council came to us and very clearly said they wanted to make change, but it's making change sensibly, carefully, and with all due respect for the community. I question whether that was under consideration. During that huge meeting where so many of us spoke, my feeling was that the council was listening but not hearing. Things were being said and they were right into the air. I felt very uncomfortable with that.
Right, just your time's up.
And I'm
Thank you very much. Henry Payens.
Well, I'll see if I can do better. I'm Henry Page, I live at 426 East 10th Avenue. Mr. Mayor, council members, Mr. Vincent Bateau, Mr. Shepherd, and Mark. The actions you, Mr. Slavy, and Mrs. Dillard took, at the council meeting right after you were sworn in, divided the city. Ever since then, we have been in the headlines of the Lake Sentinel and the Daily Commercial, such as Mount Dora Council meeting terms records over city lawyer, Slavy making waves on Mount Dora Council. Let's wait for Mount Dora Council members to get bearings. All those headlines. The negative headlines continue. When will this stop? Mr. Slavy, you want to fire Mr. Shepherd because you think this council
Point of order.
needs.
Please address the council and not an individual board member or council member, please. Thank you.
What do you mean?
Address the council. Comments are being made to the council, not to an individual council member.
Okay. It was noted in the council, a council meeting, that the council needed fresh eyes. How true, except that we don't need a new attorney, we need fresh eyes on the council. As a citizen of Mount Dora, and who likes the city, I apologize to Mr. Pastu, Mr. Regerton, Mr. Shepherd, for the actions this council takes. I feel also sorry for the department heads and staff. Your future will be rocky. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, Mike Kieran.
Mike Kernan, 110 Waterman Avenue, Mount Dora. Some comments on the conduct of meetings. You gained your positions based on the promise of more openness, transparency, and responsiveness to the citizens. Yet you have now decided not to print the full minutes of your governmental meetings, and indeed, in at least one occasion, even attempted to not allow citizens' comments until that was ruled as being illegal. Secondly, as was pointed out last Tuesday, you were elected by only a small percentage of the registered voters in Mount Dora. The rest were apparently asleep at the wheel, so to speak. Your actions and misactions have certainly succeeded in waking those who were previously dozing. Just look at the dramatic increase in the attendance at city council meetings. SRO last week, SRO this week. Lastly, I realize that most of you on the council are inexperienced in city government. This is a strong reason to seek counsel from those who are experienced, such as Mr. Pastu, Mr. Regeton, and Mr. Shepherd. And I request that you ask them to stay and be more open about seeking their advice, so that in turn, previous problems that have come up in the last 2.5 months don't continue to come up in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Masterson.
Mike Masterson, 7887 Crosswinds Way. perhaps I guess I'm going to talk about a similar topic. The media has an important role in what's reporting and what's going on Mount Dora. About 200 people will be able to attend this meeting. The rest will be depending on the media. If the media makes a couple mistakes, it loses credibility. I believe our internet and print media need to step up their game. The shift to action minutes is my first example. I listened to the audio tape. Mr. Jerome reported he'd received feedback from citizens regarding the lengthy minutes. The mayor discussed this with Mr. Pastou and suggested we shift to action minutes. To move the discussion along, Ms. Tillett made the motion. Mr. Rolfson said he had no problem with this inherently and understands. He added, this is no criticism of Ms. Johns, but understands the challenge of documenting lengthy meetings. Mr. Rolfson asked for Mr. Shepherd's opinion. Mr. Shepherd said, I don't have an issue with them. None of his clients do this currently. Mr. Rolfson asked if council could carve out exceptions. The answer was yes. Per Mr. Shepherd, their council's minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, the council approved the transition 7-0. However, the opinion piece of January 13 is just inaccurate. It stated Ms. Tillett started the discussion, Mr. Jerome did. It leaves out the discussion between Mr. Jerome and Mr. Pastou, has no mention of the important contributions of Mr. Rolfson and Mr. Shepherd. The opinion piece also stated the proposal passed 5-2. Second event, January 19th, 8:55 p.m., breathlessly announced on the internet, happening now. Mayor Nick Jerome urging council to terminate city manager and deputy city manager. Again, I've listened to the audio. In no time does Mr. Jerome urge council to terminate city manager or deputy city manager. Mr. Pastou initiated the issue by starting to read from a 3-page letter. Mr. Jerome asked Mr. Pastou to stay on. When he concluded reading his letter, the first sentence in the newsflash of January 19th is not truthful. Again, I asked the media, report facts so that the citizens are accurately informed as opposed to reporting your opinion or your desires. Please and thank you.
Thank you. Kathleen Lathorpe. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Lathrop.
Lathrop. Thank you.
I have a hand.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to address the board. I am Kathleen Lathrop. I live at 3441 Calgary Lane. We are trying to sell that house in the Village Grove subdivision. The city of Mount Dora has a 10-foot utility easement along our back lot line. And there's another 10-foot utility easement along the back lot line of our rear neighbor. So the city has an easement for utilities 20 feet wide. It is used for electric and cable. The sewer and the water are along the street. A pool was built at this home in the late 1970s or the late 1980s. The pool, at the time it was constructed, went 5 feet into the city's utility easement. There still is 15 feet of utility easement remaining in which to run electric lines. The city has been aware of the pool and taxed it for all these years. A new electric line was put into our neighborhood to serve the neighborhood in 2009. That line was put entirely across our rear neighbor's lot. It didn't come into our lot at all. There was no need to come into our lot. We've been told that there are approximately 4 or 5 other homes in our subdivision in the same situation. We have gone to the city department responsible for easements 2 times on separate occasions and been told that nothing can be done to remove the easement from our lot. Due to the new banking underwriting requirements, our home, when we sell it, may not be able to be mortgaged. This results in a devaluation of our home as well as the other homes in our neighborhood, hence less of a tax base for the city. To file paperwork to reduce or eliminate the easement from our back lot, which isn't necessary and hasn't been used, we have to pay $1,000 and provide numerous forms, one form of which is that we have to have the department head responsible for utilities say that he has no objection to this change in the easement. Now, we have gone to him twice, you know, in the last year, a number of years ago. And we've been told that that isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen. We are willing to do the above process. We're willing to pay $1,000 to have it heard. However, we can't even file the papers with the city because unless we have that form, it says in the instructions, you cannot even file the petition to be heard by the city officials. Another option that could help us in trying to sell our home and in other people in our neighborhood would be simply a letter from the city itself saying that they are aware of the pool, it's been in existence for a long time, and that the city will not require its removal due to this easement problem.
Could you wrap up your thoughts, please?
Okay. The other little interesting thing was that this pool was built in the late 1970s or 1980s. There may have been a pool permit issued, there may have been electric for the pool. The agency that issues those no longer keeps those permits, so we can't even prove that this was legally put in way back when. So how are we to correct this? We're really at the mercy of the city, and we ask for some help with this situation on behalf of ourselves and others. Thank you.
Thank you for your
Thank you very
comments.
much.
I'm going to move on to the approval of the agenda, and I'd like to, first off, I'd like to remove item number 6 from our agenda tonight. And, entertain a motion? Yes. Unless there was any other things that you just.
Would be nice to know why.
No, it's I'm removing it, if that's the idea of removing it, there's nothing to discuss. I don't want to discuss it.
Well, you need council approval to do that, so.
This is a procedural item for the council to do, and to remove an item off the agenda and to approve a new agenda.
My understanding is we can move at council meetings to add items and to delete items, but a single council member shouldn't be able to control the entire council.
No, that's what we're going to ask for. We're going to be asking for you after, if there's any other items, then I'm going to ask for a motion.
I see. Okay. You've answered my question.
Okay, thank you. Okay. If there's nothing else, I'd like to have a motion.
Move to approve the agenda as amended.
Second. Can we have a vote, please?
We get discussion on a motion, please?
Sure. There's,
We get discussion on a motion.
Mr. Shepherd, on this procedural item, we discussed that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a motion, it's on the floor, it's up for discussion unless there's no discussion.
I'd like to know the reason for that. The 2, item 6 and item number 7, seems to me are intertwined, and to take one off, without at least knowing why, causes me to wonder why, and which is why I asked the question why.
And I will answer that. And they're not intertwined. That's why there's two separate items on the agenda, because they're not intertwined. And the reason is that my research that I have done is that the state of Florida is a at-will employment type state, and agreements with the employees outside of the city manager are typically not warranted and not used. And if we go back to even to, I think, the whole list that was promulgated before the previous council, with all of the different city managers that were surveyed for whether or not we should have a city assistant city manager. None of those cities have any kind of agreements with them, and it's not something that's typically used. It can be, but it's not typically used, and it's not something that should be used. And so that is the reason for that being asked to remove off the agenda.
So let me ask another question, please. These are labor law issues that we're dealing with, and I haven't heard this council visit with Jeff, our labor attorney for the city council, and in dealing with this, since my understanding is this is an issue that was discussed ad nauseum, very intelligently and vehemently discussed a week ago on this very issue, and now we're removing it. Have we discussed the issue with our labor attorney as a council? And I don't believe we have. Should we be doing that first? Because there are some issues that we face and that might even be personally liable to us. I don't know. Those are issues that are labor law related, and this is a labor law issue, and we're walking into territory that I'm afraid is potentially dangerous without checking with an attorney. As a council, individuals might have done that, and that's fine, but individuals checking doesn't bind this council, and this council should know from our attorney that deals with and is the expert in this area before we remove something. And I don't know if the only reason for the removal is because other cities don't do that. Other cities can do that, and this city can do that. It's been proposed that we do it, and I don't know why we're so afraid to discuss it. I oppose the motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's already, motion's already.
Four to three. Four to three.
Any other discussions?
Could we?
One second, Mr. Crowell.
I guess I'd like to hear from Mr. Shepherd if you have any thoughts on.
Well, there's a number of issues out there. First, to the point that it is optional to you guys to decide to do it or not. Yeah, it is, because Florida is an at-will state. Mayor Jerome is correct. It is also true that y'all can enter contract with whomever you want to. That's spelled out in the Constitution. So there might be some requirements depending on the type of contract you enter into, but you can certainly do that. So that's an optional thing. I would tell you that from a procedural standpoint, removing something from the agenda in order to essentially substantively decide it is not a typical maneuver. You ordinarily decide the merits of the issue and decide we're not going to do this or we are going to do it. But if you chose to and there was support for it, I suppose you could, but it's kind of pushing the issue down the road as opposed to getting to the merits of should we do a contract or should we not. And in terms of the Labor Council, his name is Jeff Mandel, and I'm certainly not him, and I didn't negotiate either one of these agreements.
So my second point is, council, is that Mr. Mandel drafted this document. So our labor lawyer that we pay to do this is telling us this is one I approve, and we're saying we don't care if we approve this motion.
Mayor, when I started this a couple weeks ago, the intent with certainly with both Mr. Regentine and I to consider leaving here, it was in the context that to provide an executive level agreement for Mr. Regentine to transition from the city. Again, my assumption, that's what the council, based on election discussions and even my interpretation of other discussion afterwards meant. And so I put it in the context of both coming here separately, but the intent was to provide a transition vehicle, if you will, outside of our existing personnel policies and procedures to provide for a longer severance package and a couple of other conditions in there as well. So just the context of it.
No, I agree with you, and that this thing was tied, and I think, and it was separated out into two items, and the intent is to not to have to talk with, but my intent is that this whole thing has been tied, that this council has been asking for Mr. Regentine's termination in order for you to do something, and that has not been the case. Okay, so I was glad to see him separated, and if Mr. Regentine has any wishes to do whatever he wants to do, he's free to do what he wants to do. He's a grown man, wants to do what he wants to do. But we can discuss that with Mr. Regentine on a separate issue and not the other, and not tied in with what you want to do on yours. And we had these discussions, and I like to honor the discussions that we had.
Who's we?
If I may, through the mayor, is that the discussion was, you know, I've tied this two together. If the council elects to pull this separately, that's certainly your prerogative. But again, the starting point was in part with what I read in the memo there back in January 19th, that if we're both to go, then, you know, here's the vehicle to provide him that what I would consider is an appropriate executive level agreement of which I could execute and allow him to leave in an orderly transition without any legal potential hiccups or anything of that nature. It would be clean and orderly and amicable for all parties. So that was the intent when it came through. If the council elects to pull it,
Mr. Graham.
I was going to, if it remains on the agenda, I was going to vote no on item 6, the employment agreement for Mr. Regentine. But that's not to say that I don't want Mr. Regentine to stay. I think the timing of this is bad. I also have questions about.
Microphone's on. Yeah, we can't hear you.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I also have concerns about other department heads, and that we're creating a different set of employment contracts and so on. So, but again, that my intention to vote no should not be taken as a reflection on my wanting Mr. Regentine to go, because I don't. But I'm confused now. I understand what's being said, but I'm not sure, Mr. Mayor, if just explain that one more time. I just want to make sure I understand your thinking here.
Well, the bottom line is that this is an at-will state, and we do not need contracts with any other employee other than Mr. Pastu. And I don't want to go down that road with that, but that's not saying that if the council wants to at a future date to discuss that, we can. But for tonight's purposes, for tonight's discussions, I asked for this item to be pulled, and I have a motion, I have a second, and if we're to a point of vote, I'd like to take a vote. Ms. Johns, may I have a vote, please?
Are you going to take any public comment on this?
No, this is procedural.
On this type of motion, it's just about the agenda.
I just heard people in the audience asking.
I understand, and I wanted to make sure that everybody understands it. This is about the agenda. The reasons stated are not necessarily on that specific point, and I get that. But in terms of whether it is or isn't on the agenda, or when it comes back on the agenda, that's a procedural matter for the body.
And does it matter that there was not a second on the motion to approve the agenda?
I think there.
Somebody who seconded it?
I second.
Okay.
May I make a comment?
We're voting now.
Before the vote? May I make a comment?
Go ahead, go ahead.
How can you honestly live with yourself?
Come
Point of order.
Mrs. Rich, you're out of order.
20+ years to.
You're out of order.
No, I'm not.
You are out of order.
No, I'm not.
We're discussing this issue here right now as far as
I
removing
just
this
can't
thing.
believe someone who's spent
Mrs. Rich, please.
20+
Mrs. Rich,
years,
Miss
and you're treating
Rich.
him like this.
Mrs. Rich, please. Thank you.
Mr. Slavy,
Yes.
Mr. Roulette,
Yes.
Mr. Creel,
No.
Ms. Tillett,
Yes.
Mr. Rolfson,
No.
Ms. Rich,
No.
Mayor Jerome,
Yes. Audience please. Okay, our agenda has been changed, removing item number 6.
Was a motion to approve the agenda with that change?
No,
We approved the
yeah,
agenda
by approving
with
that,
change.
yes, with that change, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for your comments. We have discussion on a feral cat spay neuter program.
If I may, Mayor, just to introduce, this past year, the City Council appropriated $5,000 for a pilot feral cat spay neuter program. We have that in the current year budget, and tonight we have with us through the county trap neuter return program. And they'll talk a little bit about it. We're looking at doing a one-year pilot project with this, and the intent tonight is to present this to the City Council and certainly get your blessing on going forward this year with this pilot project.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I'm Whitney Lockhart. I'm the Executive Director of Leash Incorporated. TNR Lake County is one of our programs. Thank you so much for considering a humane and proactive approach to community cats in Mount Dora. Our organization has partnered with the Lake County Sheriff's Office Animal Services to support life-saving projects and programs. And as you know, back in June, the BCC unanimously voted to approve ordinance revisions to allow TNR throughout the county, with the exception of here and the town of Lady Lake. So our program went live on September 1st. Trap neuter return, for those of you who are not familiar, is the process of humanely trapping, sterilizing, vaccinating, ear tipping, and in our case microchipping community cats, and then returning them to their outdoor home. We provide an optional supplemental program for residents who are concerned about the safety and welfare of free-roaming cats and who are dedicated to becoming a lifelong caregiver for those cats. Our program is staffed entirely by volunteers and runs off of donations and grants, and we are prepared to accept tax-deductible donations for exclusive use here in your city. So for your pilot program, we would strongly recommend a systematic, targeted approach, allowing us to focus our efforts and be effective and efficient. And with your approval, we would be delighted to offer our services to your residents, just as we do for the rest of Lake County. We provide a true, comprehensive approach to TNR rooted in research and common sense. We have a TNR hotline that residents can call for advice and assistance. We dispatch our colony assessment team, and then the process begins. Our cat leaders assess the colony, log, describe, and name each and every cat. They identify nursing mothers, underage kittens. They make clinic appointments, trap, transport, recover, return. They go door to door and speak with neighbors, and they can offer deterrence to residents who may not want cats on their property. We have these really neat little things. They're called a cat stop, and it's an ultrasonic device that emits a sound. It's motion activated that only cats hear, and it keeps them away. So we are very committed to record keeping and data tracking. We just purchased a data management software to keep track of all of our TNR efforts. And I cannot stress to you enough that our goal of our program is to have fewer cats on the street. That's it. We want to have fewer cats. So we know that research shows us that to see real population reduction, we have to fix all the cats in each colony, and then we have to move next door to the adjacent colony, because we don't want to stabilize an area and then have a pregnant cat wander over and undo everything that we did, and that's why the targeting is so important. We have outlined a couple target zones, and we'll be working, if you guys allow us, with your police department and animal control to define those boundary lines. We look at very specific things like geographic barriers. We know that cats aren't going to swim across the lake to join colonies. So just like our partnership with the Lake County Sheriff's Office Animal Services, we are simply seeking to add, we do all the work, a humane and effective option for community cat population reduction. We do not in any way restrict the services already offered by your animal control. And in order for the pilot program to meet our standards of care, in addition to the $5,000 that you have allocated, we'll be doing additional fundraising to make sure that we're getting microchipped and vaccinated against distemper. So, and along the same lines as our partnership with the Lake County Sheriff's Office Animal Services, it is business as usual at the shelter. They don't really know what we do, they don't care what we do, but they offer our phone number and they refer residents to us, and we take it from there. So there really is no additional burden on your police department or your animal control. I'm sure you could call Captain Luce over at Animal Services and he'll vouch for us. We do ask that the resources that we invest in these cats are respected, and that means if we have an ear-tipped, microchipped cat, we hope that it will not be euthanized, because it was just a waste of time otherwise. So the county has instituted an ear-tip protection policy to allow us to return our cats to the location that they came from. So as far as we're concerned, your animal control can be as involved as you would like them to be. We're already providing community education, colony assessment, trapping, transport, recovery, return, data entry, and tracking with a small but growing, very dedicated group of volunteers. And we are so excited to work with you together to humanely reduce the population of community cats in your city. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about trap, neuter, return. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I think this is a great idea, by the way. I have a real quick question. Have you, when you have done this in other communities, what does 1 year bring you in as far as reduction in percentage of the feral cats in the colony, whatever?
Okay, so our program went live September 1st, so we don't have year-long data to share with you. However, we have seen in other communities, like in Gainesville, they saw a 66% reduction in shelter intake in euthanasia. Our program is different because we are really into the data collection and we send our volunteers out. So we are counting every cat, so we'll be able to see real-time data quarterly.
And do we have, does anyone here has anyone given you any idea of how many feral cats we have?
It's really hard to put a number on that. I can tell you that since October-ish, we've received over 20 calls from residents of Mount Dora saying that they are currently feeding a colony. A colony for us is typically 6 to 15 cats, so somewhere in there times the 20, but those are just folks who have called us, and this is a brand new program.
Great, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Your presentation was excellent.
Mrs. Rich, I know you put money in the budget for this thing. Do you care to comment?
Yes, living downtown, there are cat colonies, and I am one that helps some of the cat colonies. I take my own money and I spay and neuter them myself. And one of my campaign promises was to get this on the book, so I did a lot of research, talked to a great citizen, Steve Shank, and the Misfit Animal Rescue, and Leslie Campione. She actually started in Lake County the TNR program that we can do, but since Mount Dora does not have an ordinance, that is what I'm asking council for. And it's kind of funny because the police department calls me meow, meow, meow whenever I want this issue, but they see the importance. We had a great meeting of the minds, and Chief O'Grady has suggested, and as well as Robert Bell, is maybe a year pilot program to see how this does. And so if there's really more of Leash doing this, and there's no burden on our police department or animal control. And Cindy with animal control, she knows the spots and everything. She's already reached out to Whitney. So this is a very good program to do, because I hate seeing little kitties and bad things happen to the cats. So this is a humane way. So I hope I have council approval with this, because I think it's very good for Mount Dora.
Thank you. Regardless of the outcome, I intend to vote in favor of this. It sounds like a good program. I certainly hope Miss Rich gets to make the motion, because it's been her baby, or I should say her kitty. I have a procedural question of our manager. I don't see a copy of a proposed city ordinance. What is to approve this? What's the process that we should do to support it?
Initially, we had anticipated that we would have to suspend a portion of our animal control ordinance, I think after, I believe the police department, talking with the city attorney's office, felt that for a pilot project, we wouldn't necessarily need to do that. If it was to become permanent, I think the recommendation would be to...
Simply a motion?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'd like to also hear from our deputy police chief. It's in the police department, and I respect his opinion, so.
Thank you, Mr. Robson. Robert Bell, Deputy Chief of Police. I'll be brief. We do support this as a pilot program for 1 year for two reasons. One, in the long term, we believe it'll have a definitive impact on the feral cat population. Secondly, our animal control officer will play a minimal role in the program. Just for some educational stuff and just being there for support for them. So we support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Rich, you'd like to make a motion?
Yes, I would like to make a motion that we adopt this program for 1-year pilot program in the city of Mount Dora with leash and misfit animal spay and neuter.
And I will second that motion.
Second. Any other discussion? Is there any discussion from the public on this item?
Monique Richardson, 745 Hilltop Court. I just have a question. I don't think you covered it.
Would you please address your questions to the council, please?
Okay, I want her to answer these. This question also is, do you do blood testing when they first come in? And if they have the feline AIDS, leukemia, are they euthanized so they don't go back out into the colony and spread that? Because that's something that has to be a realization that people need to understand. Because I've gone through this in Orange County, so that really, sorry Marie, but
No,
you
that's
and I
okay.
both know that.
Yes.
I've had to put several of them down because I don't want them back. That's a horrible death for a feral cat to
Well,
die
she
and
has the
spread.
answer.
Okay, could you please answer that if you can?
Absolutely. So folks who have a lot more money and time than I do have done studies on this, and they have shown that in the feral cat community, incidents of feline leukemia and FIV are no greater than that of the owned cat population, which puts it at between 2 and 3%. If you pay $20 per snap test per cat, you can effectively fix 50% more cats instead of wasting your money trying to find that 2 cats per 100 that are positive. We also know that when a cat is spayed or neutered, it is not passing the disease onto its offspring because it's not having any. It's not transmitting the disease through sexual contact because it's not having any. We also know that fighting is limited because they are lacking those hormones. So in general, we're not concerned. However, it is our policy that if a cat appears to be sick, so sick that you would suspect a leukemia or FIV positive, we're not even going to waste the money on the test. We unfortunately are going to put that cat to sleep because I am not in the business of putting a cat on the street to suffer and die. So that's how we handle that situation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question about that ultrasonic thing?
Yes, I have it in the car, if you'd like to see
Now,
one.
you turned it on and it'll make cats go away.
Yes.
My cat unfortunately went deaf. Now, can I turn that on, making him come to me now?
You know, it's
Just
so
kidding. I'm
funny.
just-
Okay. Maybe.
Okay. So anyway, any other comments from the public? Seeing none, back to council. Any more comments? Okay, and may I have a vote, please?
Ms. Rich?
Yes.
Ms. Tillett?
Yes.
Mr. Ralston?
Yes.
Mr. Slavy?
Yes.
Mr. Creel?
Yes.
Mr. Roulette?
Yes.
Mayor Jerome?
Yes.
Let the record show there was a unanimous decision by the council.
Thank you very much.
Okay, there's a discussion, I'm sorry, I got it myself. City administration's recommendation to repeal the public art requirement from Land Development Code. Mr. Pastu.
Back in early January, with one of my updates, I indicated to council that, we have a perception of being developer unfriendly. And one of the things at a recent meeting with the chamber, mayor, and a number of other folks that came up in discussion was the 1% fee that for dedication toward public art on the site for development. And not many cities have it, but there are a handful out there. And I brought it to council for as a policy discussion. I mean, certainly we are a community that embraces the arts, but it is, a costly development regulatory requirement that we have. The policy is 1% of the development cost, up to $150,000. One of the recent developments that was improved would be looking close to $100,000 toward this end. Based on some feedback I got from individual council members, I offered Because you can't abdicate or abandon entirely the thought of public art, that I had suggested maybe putting $50,000 annually out of our discretionary sales tax revenue for that purpose, that could easily be supplemented with a grant and or other contributions. So I put that out there as a policy discussion for the city council to consider, and certainly look for your direction as to how we would proceed with that.
Open up a discussion.
Yes.
Ms. Dahl.
Yeah, I've got some ideas on this. I have one quick question for Mr. Pastu. This idea of the outside donations and grants supplementing the city appropriation, would that be only possible if there were a city appropriation, or could the city accept outside grants?
I have Mark, he's actually talked in a little bit of detail with me about some of that potential.
Yeah, since the, Mark Regentine, Deputy City Manager, since the recession in 2008, public arts funding has declined precipitously in terms of local and state funding. There are funds available now. Virtually all of those are matching funds, so we need funds on our side to match those. That's what they're looking for local support on almost all public arts funding.
Thank you. The staff memo states that one development that was recently approved would need to commit $100,000 for this purpose on their site. The only new development that's been recently approved that I'm aware of is the Epic Theater. When I read this ordinance, especially the definition of artwork, works of art, public art, it says all forms of, I'm going to quote here from the ordinance, says all forms of visual art conceived in any medium, material, or combination thereof, including, and then it goes and lists a whole lots of different art media, which includes video presentations. So it's apparent to me that the theater itself is a work of art in and of itself. It's the facility by which the art of video is generated for the public, and I would argue that the same would hold true for museums, playhouses, music halls, any performance structure. The structure in and of itself is part of the art, and just by this very inherent function, that, I don't know if exempt is the right word, but that makes them, I don't believe, have to put up any additional funding.
We would have, if I can address that, because we tried to have that discussion with the theater. The problem becomes when you talk about accessibility. The accessibility of art has to be accessible to the public 24 hours a day. So movies aren't accessible 24 hours a day, so it doesn't meet that requirement. So we did have that discussion, and based on the current code.
I didn't bring the whole thing. I did not bring that whole, does it say 24 hours a day in the ordinance?
It has to be visible 24 hours a day, so it could be in a lobby.
Well, but the theater itself is visible 24 hours a day. I guess my point is that public arts personifies the character of a city and its unique qualities. And we tout ourselves as an arts community. And I also believe that public arts fosters economic development and helps create a culture here that I believe encourages not only individuals but also businesses to want to come and locate here. The original ordinance, I understand, dates back from 2006 or so, before the economic downturn. And I think the ordinance is having the ordinance as a means of in helping to ensure public arts is continued is a good thing, but that doesn't mean that perhaps we don't need to revisit the words that are in it, maybe the levels of funding, maybe it could be a combination of private and public funds. There are 34 municipalities in Florida that I could find that have public arts ordinances. The complete list can be found at floridapublicart.org for those of you who are interested in this. Of those 34, approximately half have private developer participation is mandatory, but there are also many types of exclusions. So I think that the Public Arts Commission and the Planning and Zoning Board should review the current ordinance. That's how the citizens can get their input as members of these advisory boards before the council makes any decision on actually changing, the ordinance. I have no objection to having public money used for public art. I'm just not sure it would be totally equitable to not have any development money. But I think that should be a recommendation from the Public Arts Commission and the Planning and Zoning Board. They're the people that I think can best advise council on this.
Mayor, may I weigh in?
Yes, please.
There's a part of this that hasn't been considered. The law since 2006 has changed substantially on what constitutes, or maybe better to say, it's been more clearly defined as to what constitutes an unlawful exaction. Exaction is a fancy term for requiring of a development or a developer to provide some benefit, public or otherwise, and I say or otherwise meaning to a specific community in which the developer's project is there, relative to its impacts, relative to its reasonably responding to some part of what it's bringing to the table and all of those things. So to further the discussion and supportive of what Ms. Tillett is saying here, if nothing else, the ordinance should be reviewed in light of that recent case law coming all the way from the U.S. Supreme Court. So if you do not do that, for example, I don't know that 1% is too much or not too much, but I do know that it has to be rationally based and reasonably proportional, and typically that means you have to have something that you can explain later as to how you came up with that. And so for those reasons, regardless of whether it goes through these committees, I think that's important, but I think it also needs a thorough legal vetting vis-a-vis the current case law.
Mr. Olson.
That makes sense to me for a couple of other reasons. I imagine the 1% was established when the ordinance was adopted in 2006. That was obviously pre-recession times, as clearly said, we all know. And I certainly think we need to revisit that percentage. Maybe 0.5% is better under the circumstances. Maybe it stifles development if we have 1%. Maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But the questions that everyone has raised here lead me to believe it's appropriate to send this back to the Arts Council to have this properly researched and vetted, public input from the council when the time is right, drafting by our attorney of an appropriate ordinance to reflect that, and a bunch of other things. So if it takes a motion, I'll move that we do exactly that. That is, refer this matter to the Arts Council of Mount Dora for their analysis, public input, and reporting back to the council.
Is there a second motion?
Second.
Oh, my God.
This is brought to us on account of an issue with, I guess, a current developer, okay? And you want, I think initially it was just repeal the whole ordinance, and I know that was initial reaction to repeal the whole ordinance, but there's no, that was my feeling was no way, because since we do have a public arts commission as part of that ordinance, and that would destroy our public arts commission. And now we get to the question of the funding of public arts. Is the 1% too high, too low? But it also deals with the current, I think the current issue at hand. Is the motion, as stated, is it going, I mean, coming back from the Public Arts Commission, the other ones, is this going to be able to address this in a fashion, I guess in a fashion that's quick enough to handle the issues that brought it to the attention of the council to start with?
No, sir. Well, as of this moment, the development that's in place, and it really it addressed, there are 3 developments subject to the public arts requirement. The Christian Home and Bible School's science building, which they've been granted an extension on, Dora Park, which was required for a public art installation, and the Epic Theaters. Epic Theaters has come in for permitting. They're waiting permit. One of the comments back is they have to show us how they're going to provide their public art, because that ordinance is currently on the books. They're aware of that when they went through the process. Their approval is conditioned upon that. Their site plan indicates that they're going to provide public art. So they just need to show how they're going to do that in order for us to release that permit.
See, and I would argue that that theater in itself is public art. Now, maybe not a big box store, but the theater is there in order to purvey or to get out into the community art. And so the building in and of itself, I think that meets the requirement. Is there an alternative that the Planning and Zoning Board would issue a variance on that?
You would have to change the code, and I'll just read to you the publicly accessible definition. Publicly accessible means locations that are open to the general public during normal business hours and visible to the general public at all times. So a building is visible, but a building doesn't meet the definition of public art. It's the medium that is the public art. So that's the complicating factor as it relates to the theater.
Well, I disagree. I think that the building is part of the art itself. There are other things besides just what I call plop art, where you plop something down. But that's my opinion.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out here is how there's nothing that we have you go back and work with the fee that's maybe appropriate, a little more appropriate than the 1%. Is there something that can be done to expedite and to get this thing moving with the Epic Theater and get this thing, because this was the direction that was given well over a month ago, to expedite this, get them building, get their shovels in the ground, and do whatever we got to do to help this thing out. And is there anything within our purview that we can do?
I have a suggestion. You can't deviate from your own ordinance. You can't. But what you can do, and again, I certainly can't speak for theaters, but they could, assuming that this is acceptable to the department, escrow the $100,000 while we figure out what to do with the ordinance. Because it takes two, if we came up with an amendment for the next meeting, for example, it would take 2 readings to pass it. So you'd be looking at the middle of next month at the earliest that you could have it. And that assumes that 2 meetings get it done and we don't get, overwhelming discussion and that requires, let's have more study and more so forth. If they would be willing, and I don't know that they would be, but if they would be willing to escrow the money so that they have it set aside so they can meet the requirements while we revisit what we need to do with this ordinance, they can still protest because, by the way, they also think there are issues with the ordinance. I think that's probably fair to say. But if they would be willing to do that, that way they're technically not in compliance. The money's set aside and we work through the ordinances. And it may be that we come up with a new number. It may be we come up with a way to credit some of the things that Ms. Tillett says, because frankly, the idea that it's the building, that's not there. I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but that's not what the ordinance says. So if it is, if they would do that, and I don't know if they have a representative here who can speak for them, but it would allow the project to move forward.
Well, if we were to, excuse me, if we were to get rid of the ordinance, that would take 2 readings anyway. So I don't see why we don't try to work this. I mean, I would love to get that movie theater going.
Yeah, it's just timing. It's
timing.
Mr. Regenstein, you had, I'm sure you had some discussions. Is this something that can be worked?
Well, absolutely. What Cliff just said is already contained within the ordinance. That's what we've informed them of what to do. If they escrow that money, that their permit can be processed through and issued, and the art doesn't have to be in place until certificate of occupancy. So that's already part of the ordinance. We've already offered that up as a suggestion as this moves forward.
Okay. Mr. Robson?
Yeah, everything's, I'm sorry, go ahead. Please, I'll defer to you for the time.
Mr. Rowland,
I happen to agree with Ms. Tillett. For the purpose of this ordinance is to add art to the community, and the Epic Theater satisfies the ordinance, and that theater is art by definition. We can play around with the words and everything such as that. We can go out there and say, okay, put some movie marquees up there, and that could meet the requirements. But somewhere along the line, we need to get moving on this thing, because I was looking at the Arts Commission meetings. They had one last year, one. The year before that, I couldn't go back any further except for November. So if it's gonna come down to a meeting, I think it would be good that the city have put out an emergency meeting for the Public Arts Commission so we can get moving forward, so they can get this thing constructed, because it's just been going on and on and on. And with something in mind as far as art, Dora Park over there is gonna put 4 penguins as their art. In Mount Dora, 4 penguins? And that's written, okay, so, but I think we need to get moving, whatever it takes to get this epic theater starting construction. Thank you.
Mr. Olson.
Thank you. Well, you may be getting the cart before the horse a little bit, because we're discussing things that should be discussed by public input at the Arts Council. The Arts Council can call a meeting in, what, 48 hours notice or something?
Whatever reason.
Quick notice, so that's not a problem. And we have been given suggestions, strong suggestions by our legal counsel. Our ordinance may have problems. That's the end of the discussion. It needs to be corrected, and it needs to be reviewed, rather. And once reviewed, they bring it back to us, and we can ratify it when we're there. We can also attend those meetings and give them our input. So if it's going to be more discussion, I'll call a previous question, but...
No, that's, Mr. Slavy?
Well, I just have a few comments. I think to your motion that I seconded, that's one issue, but I think to your comments, and I'm sure I'm ill-advised to try to talk legal with a couple of lawyers here, but there's a sentence that Mr. Regentine referenced. It says publicly accessible means locations that are open to the general public during normal business hours, and, so I'll get to the end. But the accessibility means it's available during normal business hours. So if a theater's open from noon to midnight, it seems there. And visible by the general public at all times. It's in the same sentence. It seems like it's going together. Otherwise, why have that first part? It should just be visible by the general public at all times. But it isn't, because we first talk about publicly accessible means that it's open to the general public during normal business hours, just like this place is. And it's my view, after reading this for the first time, and visible by the general public at all times. It's implied to me that at all times that it's open. So if we had a beautiful statue here to be complying, we couldn't have it covered up. But if the Epic was open, then its stuff is visible at all times. So I'd contend that they meet the requirements, and as such, I'm not sure that they aren't exempt from it anyway. So that's part A of what I'm going to speak. Part B is I agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Rolfson that the commission ultimately should, the Arts Commission should review all this, take a real solid look at it. But I must say that what makes Mount Dora special is the arts community. I got a really nice letter today discussing that, and there's a certain panache that comes with Mount Dora. If it's 1% or something, that's important, I think, to make what Mount Dora is. It helps all of us sell everything else that we sell because it makes Mount Dora special. So I want that to be known. So thanks.
Let me just point this out, because I'm assuming, and I may be incorrect, that when you say if it's open during business hours and the public can get into it, I mean, if we're talking about the films being the art, I've not gotten a movie for free since I was a kid. So that's not public, that's private. So if we're talking about marquee, someone said, maybe, I mean, that you could like that argument. But if it's the films, maybe every so often they'll have a film festival. I don't know, but
you beat me on that part, yeah,
okay.
Definitely.
So, okay, I think we, Mr. Mayor, a couple things. I think the legal review is important. I want to move ahead with the theater and all that. A couple things that I hope will be considered. Film festival would be good. I also think, and again, I'm not sure if it technically meets the definition of public art, but I think a theater is in a unique position to offer quality art in the form of films, especially to our school kids at a free, certain free showings that that might be great. The other concern that I have, and I just learned this the other day, Mr. Pastu and Mr. Regentine shared with me that Mount Dora Christian Academy.
Excuse me, Mr. Carroll, just 1 second. I appreciate you setting up the camera, but please be mindful of Ms. John's ability to do her work over there in the corner, please. I really appreciate that.
What?
Thank you.
That the ordinance might be a particular problem to nonprofits such as Mount Dora Christian Academy and other future nonprofits that may want to build in the city. So I'm hoping that that could go into the review mix as well. I am concerned about that.
I know that when I was looking on this website with the 34 cities that showed up, that one of the exemptions I remember was a nonprofit. There was another exemption for building or constructing things, rebuilding because of acts of nature, you know, like a hurricane or fire or whatever. So, I mean, there were myriad exemptions to their policies, even for the ones where the cities had it as a mandatory for the developers.
Okay.
All the cities had some sort of public money.
Since we had a motion second, and I don't think I did not ask for public comments on this, have I yet? I have not. It's your turn. Public, want to comment on this issue?
I would like to comment. One comment. Mike Masterson, 7887 Crossings Way. Mr. Shepherd, thank you for offering a solution that we could implement.
Thank you. Anybody else in the public?
Yes, there's one lady raised.
Ozell Ward 318 East Jackson Avenue, Mount Dora, Florida. My first comment was going to be to support funding for the arts. But as I listened, my question has come, why are we struggling so hard to do something that we've had in place that other developers have had to do? And why are we struggling so hard now to make an exception?
Anybody else from the public? There was here she comes.
Hi, Liz Wincoat, 8044 St. James Way. I'm the new chairman of the Public Arts Commission, and I just have 3 comments. Could you, in your minutes, use the term Public Arts Commission as opposed to the Arts Council, because that got me a little confused. I thought that there might be another body. The second is, I don't know who the gentleman was who made the comment about this committee not meeting, and that is true. The ordinance requires this committee to meet at least once quarterly, and we did not do that last year. I think it's because we only meet when we have an agenda item, which means we only meet when there is a developer who has a project. Okay. Thirdly, I wish you would send it back to this committee. We heard about this 2 days ago via email, and we have not had a chance to digest this as a committee. So I'd like to see you give us a chance to do that. And when we do that, it really needs to, art is so very subjective. What you think of as art and I think of as art may be totally different. So the guidelines that are rewritten really need to be tight. Because I look at, is it Miss Tillett?
Tillett.
I look at some of the things that she said, and, you know, what if that movie theater starts showing X-rated movies, or Christ is risen, and people don't like the way the producer handled it? Now you have to justify that. So let's make sure that the guidelines are tight enough that they please everybody. I know you can't please everyone, but you all understand what I'm saying. You can't be that subjective. The main thing that the Public Arts Commission looks on when they take into consideration these projects is the artist himself. And that artist has to have a history of being in public art. Thank you.
I'm one who misstated that name, I apologize.
Anybody else from the public? Send it back to council, and we can move this thing for a vote. Okay, have a vote, please. Oh, wait, real quick, Rita, would you restate the motion?
To refer the matter back to the Public Arts Commission.
Okay. Go with the vote, please.
Mr. Rolfson?
Yes?
Mr. Slavy?
Yes.
Mr. Creel?
Yes.
Mr. Roulette?
Yes.
Ms. Rich?
Yes.
Ms. Tillett?
Yes.
Mr. Jerome?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, with that getting into the Public Art Commission right away, how long would it take to get that as an agenda item for them so we can get moving forward with Epic?
If I may, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I think the starting point would probably be good to have a legal review and then find our way back through the Public Arts Commission after that's been accomplished, and then certainly evaluate through the development code through P&Z to do that as well. So
I would think as a way forward, if that is the pleasure of council, we would go back ourselves, review the ordinance compared to recent cases, and come up with some suggestions, and then somebody, me or somebody, appear in front of that body whenever they meet and walk them through why we concluded what we concluded, and have them decide whether they like it or want to tweak it or whatever they want to do to it. But from our perspective, the last thing we're going to tell you is what art should or shouldn't be, but we are going to tell you what we can enforce if a developer says, no, I'm not paying.
There you go. Okay.